My mother-in-law told the judge I was a danger to my own child, so I lost custody of my son. He will forget you exist. She laughed right in my face as the gavel banged down. 4 years later, my son was in a horrific car accident and needed rare blood. No one in her prestigious family matched. I drove 6 hours breaking every speed limit to donate. The doctor compared our files and stopped breathing. He immediately called the police. What she revealed in 8 words destroyed my ex-husband's family and changed my life forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and like this video if you have ever had a family member try to erase your existence. My name is Jasmine, and I am 32 years old. Dealing with the Hayes family was like fighting a war where the enemy had infinite money and zero morals. I was standing at the head of the mahogany conference table on the 30th floor of Emory Hospital in downtown Atlanta. As the lead clinical pharmacist, I was in the middle of presenting the new toxicology safety protocols to the board of directors. This was the moment I had worked for, since my divorce left me with nothing but a mountain of legal debt and a shattered reputation. I was finally rebuilding. I was finally breathing again. The room was silent, except for the hum of the projector and my own voice explaining dosage limits for pediatric care. Then my phone vibrated against the glass surface of the table. I usually keep it off during meetings, but something in my gut told me to leave it on silent today. A mother's intuition never truly fades even when the courts try to sever the bond. I glanced down. The name on the screen made my heart stop. Emily. Emily was my white sister-in-law, the wife of my ex-husband's older brother Dante. She was the only person in that toxic house who looked at me with pity instead of disdain. But she never called. She knew her mother-in-law Lucinda monitored the call logs like a prison warden. If Emily was calling me in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, it was not to say hello. I stopped talking mid-sentence. The CEO looked at me confused, waiting for me to continue the slide on anticoagulants. I ignored him and picked up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. Jasmine, you need to get to Northside Hospital now. Emily's voice was a terrified whisper, barely audible over what sounded like screaming in the background. What is it? Is it Zion? My knees went weak at the mention of my 6-year-old son. The son I hadn't been allowed to hug in 1,460 days. There was an accident, Emily sobbed. Terrence was driving. He was distracted, arguing with his mother on speakerphone. They hit a divider on the highway. Zion lost a lot of blood, Jasmine. It is bad. Lucinda told everyone not to call you. She said you have no rights. But he is asking for his mommy. The phone slipped in my sweat-slicked hand. My vision blurred. My son was dying, and that woman was more concerned with a restraining order than his life. I did not excuse myself. I did not gather my notes. I simply turned and ran. I heard the heavy boardroom doors slam behind me as I sprinted down the hallway, past the nurse's station and toward the elevators. I pressed the button repeatedly, feeling like I was in a nightmare where my legs were moving through molasses. When the doors didn't open fast enough, I took the stairs, flying down 2 flights in my heels. When I reached the parking garage, the Atlanta heat hit me like a physical blow. It was suffocating, just like the atmosphere in the Hayes family mansion used to be. I threw my bag into the passenger seat of my sedan and peeled out of the spot. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. Northside Hospital was usually a 20-minute drive, but in mid-afternoon traffic it could take an hour. I did not have an hour. My baby did not have an hour. I merged onto the highway, cutting off a delivery truck. I didn't care about the horn blasting behind me. All I could see was Zion's face the last time I saw him. He was 2 years old, crying as the court-appointed officer pulled him from my arms. Lucinda had stood there in her designer suit, smiling that cold reptilian smile. She had won. She had painted me as an unstable, aggressive woman from the wrong side of the tracks, who was unfit to raise an heir to the Hayes dynasty. I pressed the gas pedal down. The speedometer climbed past 80, then 90. I weaved through the lanes, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Please, God, don't take him," I prayed aloud, my voice cracking in the empty car. "Don't let that woman win this too." I remembered the last legal letter I received from them. It was a cease and desist because I had sent Zion a birthday card. They claimed it was harassment. They claimed I was confusing the child. They wanted to erase me. They wanted Zion to think he had no mother. I was doing 100 miles an hour when I saw them, blue lights flashing in my rearview mirror. No. No, no, no. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel. A state trooper was right on my tail. If I stopped, I would lose precious minutes. If I didn't stop, I would be arrested for evading the police and never make it to the hospital at all. I pulled over to the shoulder, the tires screeching on the asphalt. Before the trooper's car even came to a full stop, I was reaching for my purse. Not for my license, but for my hospital identification. The officer stepped out. He was a large man, hand resting on his holster, cautious. He saw a speeding maniac. He didn't see a mother whose world was ending. I rolled down the window. The heat and noise of the highway rushed in. "License and registration, ma'am," he said sternly, walking up to the door. I didn't have time for his protocol. I thrust my Emory Hospital badge at him. Tears were streaming down my face, ruining my makeup, dripping onto my blouse. "I am a clinical pharmacist." I choked out, gasping for air. "My son is at Northside Hospital Trauma Unit. He was in a car accident. He is bleeding out." The officer paused, looking from my ID to my face. He saw the panic in my eyes. He saw the way my whole body was trembling. "Ma'am, you were doing 100 in a 65 zone," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. "I know," I screamed. "I know. Arrest me later. Put me in jail, I don't care. But please, you have to let me get to my son. His grandmother is trying to let him die rather than call me. Please, just let me go." I saw the shift in his eyes. He looked at the badge again, then at the desperation etched into my features. He made a decision. He didn't ask for my insurance. He didn't write a ticket. He handed me back my ID. "Follow me," he said firmly. He turned and ran back to his cruiser. The lights were already flashing, but then he turned on the siren. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. He pulled out into the traffic, forcing the cars to part like the Red Sea. I followed him close to his bumper. We tore through the Atlanta traffic, leaving a wake of confused drivers behind us. I wiped the tears from my eyes, trying to focus on his taillights. Every second felt like a lifetime. My mind raced with the medical possibilities. Internal hemorrhage, organ failure, hypovolemic shock. I knew too much about how fragile the human body was. As we neared the exit for Northside Hospital, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down, hoping it was Emily with good news. It was a text from an unknown number. "Do not come here. You are not welcome. Security has been alerted." It was Lucinda. A fresh wave of rage washed over me, hotter than the engine of my car. She knew I was coming. Emily must have told her. And instead of worrying about her grandson who was fighting for his life, she was coordinating security to keep me out. She had underestimated me 4 years ago in that courtroom. She thought because she had the money and the lawyers, she had the power. But she had never stood between a mother and her dying child. I gripped the wheel tighter, following the police cruiser off the ramp. The hospital loomed ahead, a massive glass structure reflecting the afternoon sun. The officer pulled up to the emergency room entrance, blocking the ambulance bay. He jumped out and signaled for me to park right behind him. I didn't even turn off the engine properly. I scrambled out of the car, my heels clicking frantically on the pavement. The officer looked at me and nodded. "Go," he said, pointing at the sliding doors. "Go save your son." I ran through the sliding glass doors. The cool air of the hospital hit me, smelling of antiseptic and fear. But as I sprinted toward the reception desk, I saw 2 large men in dark suits stepping forward to block my path. Lucinda's private security. I did not stop running. I burst through the heavy double doors of the VIP waiting area, and the atmosphere changed instantly. The chaos of the public emergency room vanished, replaced by the hushed, expensive silence of money and influence. The air here smelled different. It did not smell like antiseptic and fear, it smelled of fresh-cut lilies and expensive perfume. In the center of the room, the Hayes family was holding court. My ex-husband's mother, Lucinda, stood in the middle of a circle of well-dressed church members and family friends. She was wearing a pristine white Chanel suit that cost more than my car. Her hands were clasped together and her head was bowed. She was praying aloud, her voice trembling with a theatrical grief that I knew was completely staged. "Oh Lord, please save our heir," she wailed, just loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Save the future of the Hayes legacy from the sins of this world." I felt bile rise in my throat. My son was dying behind a wall of glass and steel just 10 feet away, and she was using his trauma as a photo opportunity for her image as the suffering matriarch. "Where is he?" I screamed, my voice shattering their performative silence. "Where is my son?" Lucinda's head snapped up. The grief vanished from her face, instantly replaced by the cold, hard stare of a viper that had just spotted a mouse. She did not speak to me directly. She simply snapped her fingers at the two large men standing by the trauma unit doors. "Remove this trash," she commanded, her voice icy and sharp. The security guards stepped forward, forming a human wall between me and the hallway that led to Zion. One of them put a hand on his belt, the other crossed his massive arms over his chest. "Ma'am, you need to leave," the guard rumbled. "This is a private waiting area." "I am not leaving," I shouted, stepping right up to him until I could smell the starch on his uniform. "My son is in there. I am Jasmine Hayes. I am his mother." "You are Jasmine." "Nothing," Lucinda hissed, stepping out from her circle of sycophants. "You lost the right to that name 4 years ago. You are trespassing." I looked past the guards, desperately searching for an ally. My eyes landed on Terrence, my ex-husband, the father of my child. He was sitting on a leather sofa, his head in his hands, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He was wearing a bespoke suit, but he looked like a child wearing his father's clothes. "Terrence," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Terrence, tell them. Tell them I have a right to know if our son is alive." Terrence looked up. For a split second, I saw the fear in his eyes. I saw the man I used to love, the man who once promised to protect me. But then he looked at his mother. Lucinda just cleared her throat, a sharp warning sound. Terrence flinched. He looked back at the floor, studying his Italian leather shoes, like they held the secrets of the universe. "He doesn't want you here, Jasmine." Terrence mumbled, his voice weak and pathetic. "Just go. Don't make a scene. Make a scene." I laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria. "My son might be dead, Terrence. This isn't a country club dinner. This is life and death." Lucinda marched over to me, stopping just inches from my face. She smelled of lavender and malice. "Look at you," she sneered, looking me up and down with disgust. "You are sweating. You are manic. You look exactly like the addict we told the judge you were. I bet you are high right now, aren't you? Did you come here to steal pain medication from the hospital, or did you actually think we would let you near Zion? I am a clinical pharmacist," I said through gritted teeth, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "I manage more medication in a day than you see in a lifetime. I am sober. I have been sober for 6 years. The only thing I am addicted to is the truth, Lucinda. And the truth is, you are blocking a mother from her child." "Security, get her out of here," Lucinda shrieked, turning to the other families in the waiting room. "She is dangerous. She has a history of violence. She might have a weapon." The guard grabbed my arm. His grip was bruising. "Ma'am, come with me, or we will have to use force," he warned. "Get your hands off me," I yelled, trying to wrench my arm free. "I am not leaving until I see a doctor." As if summoned by my desperation, the automatic doors to the trauma unit whooshed open. The air in the room shifted again. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. A man in surgical scrubs stepped out. He was not walking with the measured calm of a doctor delivering a routine update. He was rushing, His surgical cap was askew and sweat was dripping down his forehead, soaking into his paper mask. This was Dr. Hayes, the chief of trauma. No relation to my ex-husband's family, but the best surgeon in the state. He stripped off his bloody gloves, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't look at the security guards. He didn't look at the expensive flowers. He looked terrifyingly grim. "Who is the immediate family?" He barked, his voice rough with urgency. Lucinda instantly transformed again. She pushed past the security guard, shoving me aside with her shoulder. She clasped her hands over her heart, her face twisting into a mask of noble suffering. "We are here, doctor," she said, stepping forward. "I am his grandmother. This is his father. We are the Hayes family. Tell us he is going to be all right. Tell us you are fixing him." The doctor ignored her posturing. He looked straight at Terence, who had finally stood up. "We are losing him," the doctor said bluntly. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. "His heart rate is plummeting." The doctor continued, talking fast. "We have managed to stop the internal bleeding from the spleen, but he has lost too much volume. He is in hypovolemic shock. His organs are shutting down one by one." "Well, give him blood." Lucinda snapped, her tone shifting from prayerful to demanding. "Why are you standing here talking to us? Give him a transfusion. We have the platinum insurance plan. Do whatever it costs. We cannot transfuse him," the doctor said, running a hand over his exhausted face. "That is why I am here. We have a critical problem." "What problem?" Terence asked, his voice trembling. "We have exhausted the hospital's supply of O-negative blood," the doctor explained. "And even if we had it, Zion is rejecting the universal donor blood. He is having a severe autoimmune reaction. It is something I have rarely seen. His body is attacking the donor blood like it is a virus." Lucinda scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Well, that is ridiculous. Just use family blood." "We are here. We are healthy. Take mine. Take his father's. We are direct blood relatives." I tried to step forward, but the guard tightened his grip on my arm. "Let me go," I hissed at him. Lucinda heard me and spun around, her eyes flashing with triumph. "Oh no," she said, pointing a finger at me. "Do not even think about it. We do not need her. Doctor, take my blood. Take Terence's blood. We are the pure bloodline. We do not want her contaminated blood anywhere near my grandson. She is a drug addict. Her blood is poison." I stared at her in disbelief. My son was dying inside that room, and she was still playing her sick game of superiority. She would rather risk his life than admit that I might be necessary. "Doctor," I said, shouting over Lucinda's shoulder, "I am his mother. I am clean. I have medical records to prove it. Test me." Lucinda stepped in front of the doctor, blocking his view of me. "Ignore her," she commanded. "She is hysterical and unfit. Use our blood. We are ready." The doctor looked between Lucinda's arrogant face and Terence's pale, terrified one. He took a deep breath. He looked like a man who was about to deliver a death sentence. "You do not understand," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like a scream in the quiet room. "We do not have time to test you and wait for processing," he said, looking at his watch. "We do not have time to argue about insurance or custody. Zion is entering cardiac arrest right now." He looked up and his eyes were haunted. "I need a donor with a specific rare profile immediately. I am talking about O-negative or something even rarer. If anyone here has that blood type, step forward now. If you do not have it, he will be dead in 5 minutes." Lucinda froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I am type A," she whispered. Terence looked at the floor, tears streaming down his face. "I am O positive," he choked out. The doctor closed his eyes for a second, defeated. "Then we have nothing," he said. I ripped my arm out of the security guard's grasp. The adrenaline gave me the strength of 10 women. I shoved past the guard. I shoved past Lucinda, knocking her back onto the leather sofa. I stepped right up to the doctor. I rolled up the sleeve of my blouse, revealing the crook of my arm. "I am Rach Null," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the panic. I am the golden blood type, and I am his mother. Take me. The doctor's eyes snapped open. He looked at me, then at my arm, then back at my face. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't ask for insurance. He saw the truth in my eyes. Get her a gurney, he roared at the nurse's station, kicking the doors open. We are running this live. As I ran past Lucinda following the doctor into the trauma unit, I saw her face. She wasn't praying anymore. She looked terrified. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't scared that Zion would die. She was scared that I would save him. The doors to the trauma unit swung open, and I watched as Lucinda marched inside like she owned the entire hospital. Terrence followed her, looking pale and shaky, his eyes darting around the sterile environment, as if he expected to catch a disease just by breathing the air. I tried to follow them, but the security guard stepped in front of me, his massive frame blocking the doorway. Stay here, he grunted. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw his eyes out. But I knew that if I caused a scene now, they would throw me out of the building and I would never know if my son lived or died. So I stood there trembling with rage, watching through the small glass window in the door. Inside the trauma room, it was chaos. Nurses were running back and forth with bags of saline and trays of instruments. In the center of the room, lying on a bed that looked too big for him, was Zion. My baby. He looked so small. His skin was the color of ash, and there were tubes coming out of everywhere. Lucinda was standing next to the bed, not holding his hand but arguing with a nurse. She was pointing at her own arm, demanding to be hooked up. "We are ready," she announced loudly, her voice muffled by the glass but still audible. "Do not waste time with paperwork. Take the blood from us. We are the Hayes family. Our blood is the best you will find." The doctor looked exhausted. He signaled to a phlebotomist who quickly moved in to take samples from both Lucinda and Terrence. They didn't even flinch. They looked proud. They looked like they were bestowing a great gift upon the medical staff. I watched as the vials of dark red blood were drawn. Lucinda looked at her own blood with a twisted sort of reverence. "See," she said to the nurse, "pure, strong. That is what he needs, not that trash from the street." She was talking about me. Even as our son lay dying, she couldn't stop the hate. The nurse took the vials and ran them over to the rapid testing machine in the corner of the room. It was a high-tech device that could cross-match blood types in minutes. The room went silent as everyone waited. All eyes were on the small screen of the machine. I pressed my face against the glass of the door, my breath fogging it up. "Please," I whispered. "Please let it match. I don't care if it comes from her. Just save him." The machine beeped. A red light flashed. The nurse looked at the screen and frowned. She typed something on the keyboard and ran the test again. "What is taking so long?" Lucinda demanded, tapping her foot impatiently. "Just put the needle in. He needs it now." The nurse turned around slowly, holding a printout. She looked terrified. "I am sorry, Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice shaking. "We cannot use your blood." Lucinda froze. "What did you say?" The nurse swallowed hard. "It is not a match. Neither of you." "That is a lie," Lucinda shrieked. Her composure finally cracked. "That is a lie. I am his grandmother. This is his father. How can we not match?" The nurse looked at the doctor for support. The doctor stepped forward, reading the printout over the nurse's shoulder. He shook his head gravely. "Mrs. Hayes, you are type A. Terrence is type O positive. Normally, O positive is a universal donor, but Zion is presenting with a rare antigen profile. His body is rejecting standard blood types. If we give him your blood, his immune system will attack it, and he will die within minutes." Lucinda's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. She grabbed the metal rail of the bed, rattling it violently. "Check the machine," she screamed. "The machine is broken. This is a top-tier hospital and you have broken equipment. My grandson is a Hayes. He has my blood running through his veins. Do you hear me? He is one of us." The doctor tried to calm her down, but she was hysterical. She couldn't accept that her precious lineage wasn't enough to save him. She couldn't accept that biology didn't care about her bank account or her last name. Terrence looked like he was going to be sick. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. "What do we do?" he whimpered. "What do we do if we can't give him blood?" "We need a specific donor," the doctor said, his voice rising over Lucinda's screams. "We need someone with a very specific genetic marker, someone who shares this rare anomaly." I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for the guard to stop me. I slammed my shoulder into the double doors, pushing them open with a crash. The guard tried to grab me, but I was already inside. "Test me," I said, my voice ringing out in the chaotic room. Lucinda spun around, her eyes wild. "Get her out! Get her out of here! She is contaminating the room." I ignored her. I walked straight up to the doctor. I ripped off my blazer, throwing it on the floor. I rolled up the sleeve of my blouse. My arm was covered in scars. Old faded silvery lines from a car accident when I was a teenager. But Lucinda had used these scars against me in court. She had told the judge they were track marks. She had told the world I was a junkie. "Look at them," Lucinda shouted, pointing at my arm. "Look at those marks. She is a user. Her blood is full of poison. Do not touch her." I thrust my arm under the doctor's nose. "These are surgical scars," I said, staring him dead in the eye. "You know the difference, doctor. And you know I am his mother. If he has a rare antigen, he got it from me." The doctor looked at my arm, then at my face. He saw the truth. He saw the desperation. "Nurse," he barked, "draw her blood, now." "No." Lucinda lunged forward, trying to knock the needle out of the nurse's hand. "I forbid it. I am his legal guardian. I do not consent." "Security!" the doctor roared, pushing Lucinda back. "Restrain her. This is a medical emergency. Implied consent applies when a life is at risk. Get her back." Two orderlies grabbed Lucinda by the arms, dragging her away from the bed. She kicked and screamed, cursing me, cursing the hospital, cursing God. "You will kill him," she shrieked. "You are putting filth into his veins." I didn't look at her. I looked at Zion. I reached out and touched his small, cold hand. "It is okay, baby," I whispered. "Mommy is here." The nurse found a vein instantly. I watched my blood flow into the vial. It looked dark and rich. "Run it," the doctor ordered. The nurse ran to the machine. The seconds ticked by like hours. The only sound in the room was the steady beeping of the heart monitor, which was getting slower and slower. Beep, beep, beep. "Come on," I prayed. "Come on." The machine beeped. A green light flashed. The nurse gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. "Doctor," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Look at this." The doctor ran over. He stared at the screen. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at me with an expression of total shock. "It is a perfect match," he said. "It is Rach Null, the golden blood. It is one of the rarest blood types in the world." He turned to the team. "Prep her for direct transfusion immediately. We don't have time to bag it. We are going vein to vein." He looked at me. "You are going to save his life," he said. Lucinda stopped struggling. She went completely still in the grip of the orderlies. She stared at me. She stared at the machine that proved undeniable scientific compatibility. "That is impossible," she whispered. "That is impossible." "Why is it impossible, Lucinda?" I asked, my voice cold and hard as the nurses began to hook me up to the machines. "Why is it impossible that a mother can save her own son?" She didn't answer. But the look in her eyes wasn't just hatred anymore. It was fear, pure, unadulterated fear, because she knew that this blood test proved more than just compatibility. It was the first loose thread in a tapestry of lies she had been weaving for 6 years, and I was about to pull it. The doctor began the transfusion. I watched my blood travel through the clear plastic tube. I watched it enter Zion's body. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me as they drained my strength to give it to him. I was ready to die if it meant he would live. And I was ready to destroy anyone who tried to stop me. I lay back in the medical recliner watching the dark red fluid travel through the clear tubing. It was a lifeline of crimson connecting me to the small, broken body of my son, just a few feet away. The rhythmic pumping of the machine was the only sound in the room, a steady mechanical heartbeat that had replaced the terrifying silence of moments ago. I felt a strange coldness spreading through my arm, but my chest burned with a fire that had been smoldering for 4 years. Dr. Hayes was monitoring the monitors, his brow furrowed in concentration. The numbers on Zion's vitals were stabilizing slowly but surely. My blood, the blood Lucinda called poison, was bringing him back from the brink. Suddenly, the door to the trauma room cracked open just a sliver. I tensed, expecting to hear Lucinda's screeching voice or see a security guard coming to drag me out. But it was Emily. My ex-sister-in-law slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her. She looked like a ghost. Her blonde hair was disheveled and her expensive makeup was streaked with mascara tears. She pressed her back against the door, breathing hard as if she had just run a marathon. "Emily," I whispered, my voice raspy from the stress. "What are you doing here? If Lucinda sees you, she will destroy you." Emily didn't answer immediately. She walked over to my chair, her hands trembling. She looked at the tube running from my arm to Zion. Then she looked at Zion's pale face. A fresh wave of tears spilled over her cheeks. "I had to tell you," she choked out. "I couldn't keep it inside anymore, Jasmine. Not when I saw you running down that hallway. Not when I saw you willing to die for him." "Tell me what, Emily?" I asked, sitting up slightly, despite the dizziness that washed over me. She looked at the doctor, then back at me. She lowered her voice to a frantic whisper. "The accident today. It wasn't just an accident. I mean, the crash was real, but Zion, he shouldn't have been bleeding like that. He shouldn't have been so weak." My pharmacist brain kicked into high gear. "What do you mean he shouldn't be so weak? The pictures you post on Facebook show him playing soccer. They show him swimming. He looks healthy." Emily shook her head violently. "It is all staged, Jasmine. All of it. Lucinda hires a photographer. She poses him. She tells him to smile or he won't get dinner. But the reality is different. For the last 4 years, Zion has been sick. Constantly sick. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the blood loss. Sick how? "He is always tired," Emily said, wringing her hands. "He sleeps 12 hours a day. He complains that his joints hurt. And the bruises, Jasmine. God, the bruises. If you grab his arm too hard, he turns purple. If he bumps into a table, he looks like he was beaten. Lucinda says he is just clumsy. She says he has weak bones like his grandfather." "That is not weak bones," I said, my mind racing through diagnostic checklists. "That sounds like a coagulation disorder. Has she taken him to a specialist?" Emily let out a bitter laugh. "That is just it. She never takes him to a real doctor. Never. She has a concierge doctor, a private man who comes to the house. He writes whatever prescriptions she wants. She fired the last nanny because she tried to take Zion to the ER when he had a nosebleed that wouldn't stop for 3 hours. A nosebleed for 3 hours. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Emily, what is she giving him?" I asked, grabbing her wrist. "You said she writes her own prescriptions. What is Zion taking?" Emily looked terrified. She glanced at the door as if expecting Lucinda to burst through it with a weapon. "She calls it his special vitamins," Emily whispered. "She mixes it herself every morning. In his juice. She stands there and watches him drink it. She says it is an herbal supplement from Europe to boost his immune system." "What does it look like?" I demanded, squeezing her wrist. "What does the powder look like?" "It is blue," Emily said. "A pale, chalky blue powder. It has no label. It comes in a clear jar she keeps in her bedroom safe. Blue powder." My mind flashed through every medication I knew. Blue powder could be anything. It could be electrolytes. It could be generic Viagra. But in the context of unexplained bruising, bleeding gums, and extreme fatigue, blue powder meant something else entirely. "Did it have a smell?" I asked, my voice turning deadly calm. "When she mixed it, did you ever smell it?" Emily closed her eyes, trying to remember. "Once," she said. "I knocked the glass over by accident. It smelled bitter. Like old almonds or chemicals. Bitter almonds. Cyanide." No, Zion would be dead instantly. But anticoagulants, rat poison, warfarin. The commercial-grade stuff often came in a blue or green tracking powder, so humans wouldn't eat it by mistake. I looked at Dr. Hayes, who had stopped checking the monitors and was listening to us, his face pale. "Doctor," I said, my voice trembling with rage, "we need to check his stomach." Dr. Hayes moved immediately. He walked to the bedside and gently lifted the thin hospital gown covering Zion's small torso. I leaned forward, ignoring the IV in my arm. What I saw made me gasp. Zion's stomach wasn't just bruised from the seatbelt. It was a map of agony. There were deep purple splotches across his abdomen, but they weren't fresh. They were layered. Some were yellow and fading, some were greenish-brown, some were angry and red. "These are petechiae," Dr. Hayes whispered, tracing the small red dots scattered across his skin. "And these larger masses, this is deep tissue hemorrhage." "This didn't happen in the car crash," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. "No," Dr. Hayes said grimly. "These are chronic. This child has been bleeding internally for months, maybe years." I looked at Emily. She was sobbing quietly, her hand over her mouth. "She is poisoning him," I said. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just bad parenting. Lucinda was systematically dosing my son with blood thinners. Why, I asked, the air leaving my lungs? Why would she do this to her own grandson, the air she fought so hard to steal from me? Emily looked up, her eyes full of a dark realization. "Because as long as he is sick, he needs her," she whispered. "As long as he is sick, he can't leave the house. He can't go to school where teachers might ask questions. He can't see you. And what, Emily?" "And the trust fund," Emily said. "The Hayes family trust." I heard her talking to her lawyer. "It only pays out for medical expenses until the heir turns 18. Unless the heir is permanently disabled. Then the guardian gets full control of the principal amount immediately." The horror of it was absolute. She was slowly killing him to access millions of dollars and to keep him as her permanent prisoner. She was draining the life out of him drop by drop and blaming his genetics. Dr. Hayes turned to the counter. He grabbed a biohazard bag and a syringe. "I am drawing a toxicology screen right now," he announced, his voice hard as steel. "And I am adding a specific panel for rodenticides and superwarfarins." I looked at Zion's sleeping face. He looked so peaceful, unaware that the orange juice his grandmother gave him every morning was a death sentence. I looked at the tube of blood connecting us. I wasn't just giving him blood. I was replacing the poison. I was flushing out her evil and filling him with the truth. "Lock the door," I said to Emily. She looked at me, startled. "What? Lock the door?" I repeated. "Do not let her in. Do not let Terrence in. If she comes in here, I will kill her with my bare hands, and I don't want to go to prison before I see her in handcuffs." Emily nodded. She walked over and turned the lock on the trauma room door. Just then, the handle jiggled from the outside. Then, a fist pounded on the wood. "Open this door," Lucinda's muffled voice screamed. "I know you are in there, Emily. Open this door immediately. I need to see my grandson." I looked at Dr. Hayes. He nodded at me. "Let her scream," I said. "She can scream all she wants, because when those test results come back, the only person she is going to be talking to is a homicide detective." I stepped out of the trauma unit and the world tilted sideways. My knees felt like water. Losing a pint of blood so quickly after the adrenaline spike of the drive had left me lightheaded and trembling. I had to lean against the cold wall of the corridor just to keep from sliding to the floor. The nurse offered me a juice box and a cookie, but I waved her away. I could not eat. Not when the predator was waiting for me just 10 feet away. Lucinda was pacing back and forth in the private waiting area, her heels clicking against the linoleum like gunfire. She had her phone pressed to her ear and her back was to me. I could hear every word she was saying, and it made my blood boil all over again. "Yes, I want her arrested immediately," Lucinda hissed into the phone. "She assaulted private security. She invaded a sterile medical environment. I don't care if she donated blood. That is biological theft. She manipulated the doctors. I want a restraining order filed by the end of the business day. And I want full custody reaffirmation. She is dangerous. She was calling her lawyer. Of course she was. Her grandson was lying in a coma with tubes down his throat, and her first instinct was not to pray, but to litigate. She wanted to make sure that saving my son's life was the last thing I ever did as a free woman. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The weakness in my limbs was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't the scared 26-year-old girl she had crushed in family court anymore. I was a mother who had just seen the map of torture written on her child's skin. I pushed myself off the wall and walked toward her. Lucinda heard my footsteps. She spun around, phone still to her ear. When she saw me, her face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. She held up a finger to the person on the other end of the line. "Hold on," she said. "The problem is standing right in front of me." She lowered the phone but didn't hang up. She looked me up and down, taking in my disheveled hair, my missing blazer, and the small bandage on the crook of my arm where they had drained me. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "look who is still standing. I thought you would have passed out by now. You always were weak." I stopped 3 feet from her. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, trying to see if there was any humanity left behind those cold eyes. "Thank you for the blood," Lucinda said with a cruel smirk. "It was the least you could do, really. Consider it payment for the years of child support we didn't ask you for. But now that you have served your purpose, you can leave. Security is on their way back up, and I would hate for you to be dragged out in handcuffs in front of the nurses. It is so undignified." She waved her hand at me like she was shooing away a stray dog. "Go on," she said. "Get out. You are nothing but a dairy cow to us, Jasmine. You gave the milk. Now go back to the pasture." A dairy cow. She compared the life-saving transfusion to livestock. I felt a scream building in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Screaming was what she wanted. Screaming proved I was unstable. Screaming was the old Jasmine. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hand was steady now. I unlocked the screen and opened the gallery. The first image was vivid and horrifying. It was a close-up of Zion's abdomen taken just 5 minutes ago. The purple and yellow bruises stood out in high definition against his pale skin. It looked like a galaxy of pain. I turned the screen toward her. Lucinda's smirk faltered. She squinted at the image. "What is that?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "That is your handiwork, Lucinda?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "That is Zion's stomach. I saw it when the doctor lifted his gown. Those are not from the car accident. Those are old bruises, layer upon layer of internal bleeding." Lucinda laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "You are delusional," she scoffed. "He plays soccer. He is an active boy. Boys get bruises. Boys get shin splints," I corrected her. "Boys get scraped knees. Boys do not get deep tissue hemorrhaging that indicates chronic anticoagulant poisoning." I swiped to the next photo. A close-up of the petechiae, the small red dots that screamed of a clotting disorder. "I know what you are doing," I continued, stepping closer to her. "I spoke to Emily. I know about the special blue powder you put in his juice every morning. I know you forbid him from seeing real doctors." Lucinda's face went pale. The hand holding her phone dropped to her side. "You are crazy," she whispered. "You are a paranoid, vindictive woman trying to frame me." "Maybe," I said, shrugging my shoulders. "Maybe I am crazy. But do you know who isn't crazy? The Georgia Department of Child Protective Services." I tapped the share icon on my screen. My thumb hovered over the email address for the regional CPS director, a contact I had saved from my own custody battle years ago. "I am reporting this right now," I said. "I am attaching these photos. I am attaching Emily's statement. And I am attaching the toxicology request that Dr. Hayes just sent to the lab. Once I hit send, they will be here within the hour. They will take Zion into emergency state custody. You will never see him again. The Hayes Trust Fund will be frozen pending a criminal investigation. Lucinda stared at my thumb. For the first time in 6 years, I saw genuine terror in her eyes. It wasn't the fear of losing a grandson. It was the fear of losing control. It was the fear of losing the money. She hung up on her lawyer. She slipped the phone into her pocket and took a step toward me. Her entire demeanor changed. The sneer vanished, replaced by a soft, pleading expression that was even more terrifying because it was so fake. "Jasmine," she said, her voice dropping to a sweet, cajoling tone. "Jasmine, honey, wait. Let's not be hasty. Think about Zion. Do you really want him in the foster system? Do you want strangers watching him while he recovers?" "I want him away from you," I said firmly. "Look, I know we have had our differences," Lucinda said, smoothing the front of her Chanel suit. "I know I have been hard on you, but I was just protecting the family. Maybe I was too strict with his vitamins. I was just trying to keep him healthy." She reached out and touched my arm. I flinched away from her like she was radioactive. "How about this?" she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You don't send that email. You delete those photos right now. And in exchange, I will grant you visitation." I stared at her. "You will what I will tell the lawyers to draft a new agreement," Lucinda said, smiling tightly. "Supervised visitation. Once a month. You can come to the house. You can see him. You can sit with him. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what you have been begging for? It was a deal with the devil. She was offering me crumbs of my own child in exchange for her freedom. She thought I was desperate enough to take it. She thought I was stupid enough to trust her. Once a month, I repeated, pretending to consider it. "Yes," Lucinda said, nodding eagerly. "We can start next week. Just delete the photos, Jasmine. We don't need the authorities involved. This is a family matter. We can handle it like family." I looked at the phone. I looked at the send button. Then I looked at the trash icon. I knew exactly what she would do. As soon as I deleted them, she would have me arrested anyway. She would destroy the agreement. She would bar me from the house. But I needed time. I needed the toxicology results to come back before the police arrived. I needed Dr. Hayes to have the hard science to back up my accusations. If I called CPS now, she might talk her way out of it before the labs were done. I need to play her game, I thought, just for one more hour. "Okay," I said, letting my shoulders slump. "Okay, Lucinda. I just want to see my son." "Good choice." Lucinda breathed a sigh of relief. "You are being a good mother, Jasmine. Now delete them." I held the phone up so she could see. I selected the photos. I pressed the trash can icon. "Delete items." The prompt appeared. I pressed yes. The photos vanished from the gallery. "There," I said, showing her the empty album. "They are gone." Lucinda smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just escaped a trap. "Excellent," she said. "I will have my lawyer draw up the papers. You can go now, Jasmine. We will be in touch." She turned her back on me immediately, dismissing me once again. She pulled her phone back out, probably to call the security team to escort me out. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking softly on the floor. I walked toward the elevators, my head held high. Lucinda thought she had won. She thought the evidence was gone. But she was from a generation that didn't understand technology. She didn't understand the cloud. As I stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, blocking her from my view, I pulled my phone back out. I opened the hidden folder app. Upload complete. The photos were safe. And not only were they in the cloud, I had already auto-forwarded them to Dr. Hayes's secure hospital email server the moment I took them. I leaned my head against the cool metal of the elevator wall and closed my eyes. "Enjoy your victory lap, Lucinda," I whispered, "because the race isn't over. It has just begun." Dr. Hayes stepped into the cool, sterile silence of the pathology laboratory, leaving the chaos of the hallway behind him. The air conditioning hummed with a low, steady drone that usually helped him think, but today it sounded like a countdown. He walked straight to the high-resolution digital microscope where the technician had already prepared the slides. The room was bathed in the soft blue glow of computer monitors. This was his sanctuary. Out in the waiting room, people lied. They postured and threatened and sued. But in here, under the lens of a microscope, cells could not lie. DNA did not care about trust funds or designer suits. He sat down on the stool and leaned forward, pressing his eyes to the viewfinder. The first slide was the cross-match between Jasmine and Zion. It was beautiful. In his 30 years of medicine, Dr. Hayes had never seen a match this perfect, especially with a blood type as volatile as Rach Null. The red blood cells from the mother were interacting with the son's plasma with zero resistance. It was as if they were two pieces of the same soul finding each other across a chemical divide. There was no clumping, no antibody attack. It was biological harmony. He pulled back and looked at the computer screen where the genetic markers were listed. Jasmine's file, which he had pulled from the hospital archives, was open on the left. Zion's current profile was on the right. They shared the same rare deletion in the RAG gene. It was a genetic fingerprint so unique that the odds of two unrelated people having it were 1 in 6 million. This woman was without a doubt the boy's biological mother. The court documents Lucinda waved around, claiming Jasmine was a surrogate or unrelated, were scientifically laughable. But then Dr. Hayes pulled up the third file. Terrence Hayes, the father, or at least the man who claimed to be the father. Dr. Hayes frowned. He tapped a few keys overlaying Terrence's genetic profile onto Zion's. Something was wrong. He cleaned his glasses and looked again. He zoomed in on chromosome 15. The Hayes family was famous in Atlanta not just for their money, but for their distinctive look. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and they all had deep, dark brown eyes. It was a dominant trait. Terrence had it. Lucinda had it. Every Hayes going back 3 generations had it. But Zion had eyes that were a strange, shifting color, a mix of brown and emerald green. Dr. Hayes had always assumed it was a mutation or a recessive gene from the mother. But looking at Jasmine's file, she had dark eyes too. He scrolled down to the hair texture markers. Zion had a specific allele for a tight, coiling curl pattern, a recessive trait. Terrence's profile showed 2 dominant alleles for a looser wave. Biologically speaking, 2 parents with those specific dominant markers could not produce a child with Zion's specific recessive traits. It was like adding 2 plus 2 and getting 5. Dr. Hayes felt a cold sweat prickle on the back of his neck. He wasn't just looking at a medical anomaly. He was looking at a lie. A lie that had been buried in a petri dish 5 years ago. If Terrence was the biological father, this genetic combination was impossible. He sat back in his chair, his heart racing. He thought about Lucinda's obsession with the bloodline, her constant speeches about the Hayes legacy, her desperation to use her own blood even when it was incompatible. She knows, he thought. Deep down, she knows he isn't a match. He reached for the phone on the desk. He dialed the internal extension for the genetic testing lab. "This is Dr. Hayes," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need an emergency paternity panel run on Zion Hayes and Terrence Hayes. Use the blood samples from the trauma draw." There was a pause on the other end. "Doctor," the technician said hesitantly, "that requires a court order or parental consent. The grandmother has already flagged the file. She said no unauthorized testing." "I am authorizing it," Dr. Hayes snapped. "I am the chief of trauma, and I have a dying patient with a genetic mystery that is preventing proper treatment. If anyone asks, tell them I ordered it to check for hereditary clotting disorders. Just run the test. I want the results within the hour." He hung up before the technician could argue. He knew he was crossing a line. He knew he could lose his medical license if he was wrong, but he couldn't shake the image of Jasmine's desperate face or the bruises on Zion's stomach. The bruises. Dr. Hayes spun his chair around to the toxicology analyzer. It was a massive machine in the corner, tasked with screening blood for poisons and drugs. He had loaded Zion's sample 10 minutes ago. The machine was whirring softly, processing the plasma, searching for thousands of known toxins. Emily's words echoed in his head. Blue powder, unmarked jar, vitamin juice. He walked over to the machine. The status bar was at 99%. Please be wrong, he whispered to the empty room. Please let it just be a vitamin deficiency. Please let me be a paranoid old doctor. Because if he was right, then the grandmother sitting in his waiting room wasn't just a narcissist. She was a monster. The machine beeped, a sharp piercing sound that signaled a critical result. The screen flashed red. Dr. Hayes leaned in. He read the chemical breakdown. Warfarin. Positive. But it wasn't just positive. The quantitative level was off the charts. Normal therapeutic range for a patient on blood thinners was between 2 and 3. Zion's level was 25. Dr. Hayes gasped. He grabbed the edge of the counter to steady himself. This wasn't an accidental ingestion. A child didn't accidentally eat 10 boxes of rat poison. This was a massive chronic dose. The graph showed metabolites, which meant this had been going on for months. The boy had been ingesting superwarfarin every single day. His blood was so thin, it was basically water. That was why he bruised if you touched him. That was why he was bleeding internally. That was why the car accident, which should have been minor, had nearly killed him. Dr. Hayes felt a wave of nausea. He looked at the second result below the warfarin. Arsenic. Trace amounts. She wasn't just thinning his blood, she was slowly shutting down his organs. The blue powder. The blue. It was a cocktail of death. Dr. Hayes ripped the printout from the machine. His hands were shaking not with fear, but with a rage so white-hot it almost blinded him. He thought of Lucinda praying in the lobby. He thought of her calling Jasmine a junkie. He thought of her claiming she was protecting the family legacy. She was murdering the boy. She was murdering him slowly, painfully, and methodically right under everyone's noses. He grabbed the phone again. This time he didn't dial the lab. He dialed a number he rarely had to use. Hospital security, he barked. This is Chief Hayes. Initiate a code gray lockdown for the trauma unit. No one enters or leaves. And call the Atlanta Police Department. Tell them we have a confirmed case of aggravated poisoning of a minor. He slammed the phone down. He looked at the 2 pieces of paper in his hand. In his left hand, the proof that Terrence was not the father. In his right hand, the proof that Lucinda was a killer. He took a deep breath, smoothing his scrubs. He needed to go back out there. He needed to face them. He walked to the door of the lab. He paused for a second, composing his face into a mask of professional detachment. But inside, he was ready for war. He pushed the door open and stepped back into the hallway. The lights seemed brighter now. The stakes were no longer just medical. He was about to walk into that waiting room and drop a nuclear bomb on the Hayes dynasty. And he was going to enjoy every second of it. I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair outside the intensive care unit, watching the digital clock on the wall tick away the seconds. It had been 40 minutes since the transfusion ended. 40 minutes since I watched my dark red blood flow into my son's veins, replacing the fluid he had lost. Dr. Hayes had assured me the procedure went perfectly, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread settling in the pit of my stomach. The hallway was quiet now. The earlier chaos had subsided. Terrence was pacing at the far end of the corridor, whispering into his phone, probably trying to explain to his new girlfriend why he was going to be late. Lucinda had disappeared shortly after the transfusion began, claiming she needed to go to the chapel to pray for her grandson's soul. I didn't believe her for a second. Lucinda didn't pray. She prayed. I leaned my head back against the wall, closing my burning eyes. I just needed Zion to wake up. I needed him to open those beautiful eyes that were a mix of mine and a stranger's and tell me he was okay. I needed to hear his voice, even if he didn't remember me. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. A high-pitched alarm began to scream from inside Zion's room. It wasn't the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. It was a continuous, piercing wail that signaled catastrophic failure. I jumped to my feet just as the double doors flew open and a team of nurses rushed in pushing a crash cart. "Code Blue," the lead nurse shouted, her voice echoing down the hall. "We have a seizure in bed 4, respiratory distress. Get the doctor!" My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Bed 4. That was Zion. I didn't think. I didn't wait for permission. I ran. I sprinted past the nurse's station, ignoring the receptionist shouting at me to stop. I burst into Zion's room just behind the crash cart. The scene before me was a nightmare brought to life. My son, my sweet little boy, was arching off the bed. His small body was convulsing violently, shaking the metal rails of the hospital bed. His eyes were rolled back in his head, showing only the whites. Foam was bubbling at the corners of his mouth. But it was the monitor that terrified me the most. His oxygen levels were plummeting. 70%, 65%. He wasn't breathing. "Do something," I screamed, pushing my way to the bedside. A young resident doctor was trying to hold Zion down, looking panicked. "He is not responding to the Ativan," he shouted over the alarm. "His airway is closing up. We need to intubate." I looked around the room frantically. What had happened? He was stable 5 minutes ago. Transfusion reactions didn't look like this. This wasn't an allergic reaction. This was neurological. Then I saw her. Lucinda was standing in the corner of the room, pressed against the shadows. She wasn't praying. She was watching. Her hands were clutching her purse tightly to her chest, and her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with anticipation. On the bedside table next to Zion's half-empty water pitcher sat a small plastic cup, a cup that hadn't been there when I left the room. I looked at the cup. There was a small amount of water left in the bottom, but it looked cloudy. There was a faint blue residue on the rim. She had been here. While the nurses were changing shifts, she had slipped in. She had given him a drink. Rage hotter than anything I had ever felt exploded in my chest. She had tried to finish what she started. She knew my blood was saving him, and she couldn't allow that. She needed him weak. She needed him to crash so she could blame my blood. She wanted to prove to the world that I was poison, even if it meant killing him to do it. I lunged toward the bed, leaning over my son. I grabbed his face, forcing his mouth open slightly to check his airway. And then I smelled it. Underneath the metallic scent of blood and the antiseptic smell of the hospital, there was something else on his breath. It was faint, but undeniable to a trained pharmacist. It smelled bitter, sharp, like crushed almonds and chemical fertilizer. It was the smell of high-grade rodenticide mixed with an accelerant. "He has been poisoned," I screamed, turning to the resident. "This is not a seizure. This is a cerebral hemorrhage induced by superwarfarin. He is bleeding into his brain." The resident looked at me like I was crazy. "Ma'am, please step back," he yelled, reaching for a sedative. "We are treating him for a transfusion reaction. Your blood caused this." "No!" I roared, grabbing the resident's wrist. "My blood is perfect. Look at his gums." I pulled Zion's lip down. His gums were bleeding. Fresh, bright red blood was oozing around his teeth. "He has ingested a massive dose of anticoagulants within the last 20 minutes, I shouted. "If you give him a sedative, you will kill him. He needs the antidote." The resident hesitated, looking at the monitor, then at me. "We can't administer medication without a confirmed diagnosis," he stammered. "We don't have time for a diagnosis," I yelled. "Look at the monitor. His intracranial pressure is spiking. He is going to stroke out." I turned to the nurse holding the crash cart. "Give me vitamin K1, I commanded, using my voice that I used to run the pharmacy floor. "Phytonadione, 10 milligrams IV, push immediately, and get me fresh frozen plasma. We need to reverse the thinning now." The nurse looked terrified. She looked at the resident, then at Lucinda, who had stepped forward. "Do not listen to her," Lucinda shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is trying to kill him. That is the drug she uses. She is trying to overdose him. Get her away from my grandson." The resident looked confused. He was young and inexperienced, and he had a screaming grandmother in a Chanel suit telling him one thing and a frantic mother telling him another. "Security," the resident called out. "Remove the mother." Two guards grabbed my arms, pulling me away from the bed. "No," I screamed, fighting them with everything I had. "You are killing him. Give him the vitamin K, please. It won't hurt him if I am wrong, but it will save him if I am right. Just give it to him." Zion's convulsing grew worse. The monitor flatlined for a second, then picked up a chaotic, erratic rhythm. "He is coding," the nurse yelled. "Starting compressions." "No! Don't compress!" I begged, tears streaming down my face. "If you do compressions with his blood that thin, you will crush his heart. You will cause massive internal bleeding. Stop." The guards dragged me backward toward the door. I watched helplessly as the nurse placed her hands on my son's fragile chest, preparing to push. Lucinda smiled, a small, almost imperceptible lifting of the corner of her mouth. She had won. "Stop!" The voice boomed from the doorway like a thunderclap. Dr. Hayes stood there. He was holding a sheaf of papers in his hand, and he looked like the wrath of God. "Stop compressions immediately," Dr. Hayes ordered, striding into the room. He looked at the resident. "Did you hear the mother?" he barked. The resident stammered. "Sir, she is the lead clinical pharmacist at Emory Hospital," Dr. Hayes shouted. "And she is right." He threw the papers onto the crash cart. "I just came from the lab. The toxicology screen is positive for brodifacoum. Rat poison. The levels are lethal." He turned to the nurse. "Vitamin K1. 10 milligrams IV push. Now, do it." The nurse didn't hesitate this time. She grabbed the vial, snapping the top off and drawing it into a syringe. She pushed it into Zion's IV line. I stopped fighting the guards. They loosened their grip, realizing the tide had turned. We all watched the monitor. 10 seconds. Nothing happened. Zion continued to shake. 20 seconds. "Come on, baby," I whispered. "Fight." 30 seconds. The violent arching of his back stopped. The convulsing slowed to a tremor, then ceased. His oxygen levels began to creep up. 65, 70, 80. The chaotic rhythm on the heart monitor smoothed out, settling into a fast but steady tachycardia. "He is stabilizing," the nurse breathed, letting out a sob of relief. "The bleeding is slowing." Dr. Hayes stepped up to the bed, checking Zion's pupils. "He is back," Dr. Hayes said. "We caught it just in time. The vitamin K is promoting clotting factors. The brain bleed has stopped." He turned slowly to face the room. I slumped against the doorframe, my legs finally giving out. I slid to the floor, weeping silently. I had done it. I had saved him again. But the room wasn't done with the drama. Dr. Hayes walked over to the bedside table. He picked up the plastic cup with a gloved hand. He sniffed it. "Bitter almonds," he said, looking directly at me. "You were right, Jasmine." He turned his gaze to the corner of the room. Lucinda was trying to inch toward the door. Her face was the color of old paper. She looked like a trapped animal. "Where are you going, Mrs. Hayes?" Dr. Hayes asked, his voice dangerously calm. I need to get water," Lucinda stammered, clutching her purse so tight her knuckles were white. "The stress, it is too much." "Stay right there," Dr. Hayes ordered. He pointed to the security guards who were still standing next to me. "Gentlemen, do not let that woman leave this room. She is no longer a visitor. She is a suspect in an active attempted murder investigation." Lucinda gasped. "How dare you? I am a Hayes. I don't care who you are," Dr. Hayes said, stepping between her and the door. "You just tried to murder my patient in my trauma unit, and you did it to frame his mother." He looked down at me sitting on the floor. He extended a hand to help me up. "Stand up, Jasmine," he said gently. "You just proved you are the only person in this room fit to make medical decisions." I took his hand and pulled myself up. I wiped the tears from my face. I looked at Lucinda. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the trembling fear of a woman who knew her house of cards had just been set on fire. And I was holding the match. The atmosphere in the trauma unit shifted from medical urgency to something far more dangerous. The air grew heavy with a tension that made it hard to breathe. I sat on the floor next to my son's bed, holding his hand, which was finally starting to feel warm again. The monitors were steady now, the rhythmic beep providing a stark contrast to the storm that was brewing just outside the glass doors. Dr. Hayes did not return to his office. Instead, he walked to the nurse's station in the center of the unit and picked up the red phone on the wall. It was a direct line to Hospital Administration and Security Command. I watched through the glass as he spoke, his face set in grim lines. He wasn't just calling for a guard, he was calling for an army. Moments later, the overhead speakers crackled to life. Code Gray in the Northside Trauma Center. Code Gray. Total lockdown initiated. No entry or exit permitted. The electronic locks on the main doors slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud that echoed down the hallway. The lights in the corridor flickered for a second as the emergency system engaged. It felt like a prison cell closing. Lucinda, who had been trying to inch her way toward the exit, froze. She looked at the locked doors, then back at Dr. Hayes with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she shouted, her voice shrill in the sudden silence. "Open these doors immediately. I am Lucinda Hayes. You cannot hold me here against my will. This is kidnapping." Dr. Hayes walked slowly toward her. He didn't look like a doctor anymore. He looked like a judge. "This is not kidnapping, Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice projecting clearly across the room. "This is a crime scene preservation. I have contacted the Atlanta Police Department. They are 5 minutes away. Until they arrive, nobody leaves this floor. Not the staff, not the family, nobody." Terrence stepped out from the corner where he had been hiding. He looked terrified, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mom, what is going on?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why are they calling the police? Is Zion okay?" Lucinda spun on him, her eyes wild. "Of course Zion isn't okay," she spat, pointing a shaking finger at the room where I was sitting. "That woman tried to kill him. She poisoned him with her blood. I told you she was an addict. I told you her blood was dirty. Now look what happened. She sent him into a seizure." I stood up slowly, my legs still weak, but my spirit stronger than it had been in years. I walked out of Zion's room and into the hallway, standing my ground. "Stop lying, Lucinda," I said, my voice calm and steady. "The blood didn't cause the seizure. The rat poison you have been feeding him for months caused the seizure. The blue powder caused the seizure." Lucinda gasped, clutching her pearls in a gesture so cliché it would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "You are projecting your own sins onto me. You are the one who knows about drugs. You are the pharmacist. You probably slipped something into his IV when the nurses weren't looking." Dr. Hayes stepped between us. "Enough," he roared. He turned to the security guards who were now blocking every exit. "Secure the area," he ordered. "I want everyone's bags placed on the central table. No one touches their phones. No one touches their pockets. If anyone tries to discard anything, detain them immediately." 2 police officers appeared at the glass doors on the other side of the lockdown barrier. They swiped their badges and the doors hissed open just long enough to let them in before slamming shut again. They were not patrol officers. They were detectives. Dr. Hayes had called in favors. "Gentlemen," Dr. Hayes said, nodding to the detectives. "Thank you for coming so quickly. We have a confirmed case of aggravated poisoning of a minor. The substance is brodifacoum, super warfarin." The lead detective, a tall man with tired eyes, looked around the group. "Who had access to the child?" he asked, taking out a notepad. Everyone looked at Lucinda. She puffed up her chest, trying to regain her composure. "I am his grandmother," she stated haughtily. "I am his primary caregiver. I have sacrificed my life for that boy." "This accusation is absurd." The detective didn't seem impressed by her Chanel suit or her attitude. "Ma'am, I need you to place your purse on the table," he said, gesturing to the large designer bag she was clutching like a lifeline. Lucinda hesitated. She took a half-step back. "This is private property," she said. "You have no warrant." "Exigent circumstances, ma'am," the detective said, stepping closer. "A child just nearly died. Put the bag on the table or we will put you in handcuffs and take it." Terence looked at his mother, his eyes wide with confusion. "Mom, just give it to them," he pleaded. "If you didn't do anything, just show them." Lucinda glared at her son, a look of pure betrayal. Slowly, with shaking hands, she placed the bag on the nurse's station counter. The detective put on a pair of blue latex gloves. He opened the bag. I watched, holding my breath. I knew she was arrogant. I knew she thought she was untouchable. But was she careless enough to bring the weapon to the crime scene? The detective pulled out a wallet, keys, a lipstick, a rosary. And then he reached into the zippered interior pocket. He pulled out a small glass vial. It was about the size of a pill bottle. It had no label. Inside there was a clear liquid with a blue sediment settling at the bottom. The room went deathly silent. "What is this?" the detective asked, holding the vial up to the light. Lucinda didn't blink. She didn't stumble. "It is holy water," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "It is blessed water from the Cathedral of Christ the King. I sprinkle it on Zion when he is sick. I was going to bless him today." "Holy water?" Dr. Hayes asked, stepping forward. "Since when is holy water blue, Mrs. Hayes? It is anointing oil mixed in." Lucinda stammered, her confidence cracking just a fraction. "It is a special blend." Dr. Hayes held out his hand. "Give it to me," he said to the detective. "I can run a spectral analysis in the lab downstairs. We will know exactly what is in this holy water in 10 minutes. Lucinda lunged. It happened so fast. She threw herself at the detective, trying to knock the vial out of his hand. "No," she screamed. "You cannot take that. It is sacred." The detective sidestepped her easily, and the second officer grabbed Lucinda's arms, pinning them behind her back. "Get off me!" she yelled, struggling against his grip. "This is police brutality. I am a Hayes. I will have your badge. Terence, do something." Terence stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked at the vial. He looked at his mother. "Mom," he whispered. "Is that the stuff you put in his juice? Is that the vitamins?" "Shut up, you idiot," Lucinda hissed at him. "Don't say a word." The detective handed the vial to Dr. Hayes. "Run it," the detective said. Dr. Hayes nodded and handed it to a nurse who sprinted toward the lab. Lucinda stopped struggling. She stood there, panting, her hair disheveled, her expensive suit rumpled. She looked at me with eyes full of hate. "You did this," she spat. "You planted it. You jealous, spiteful little creature. You couldn't stand that he loved me more. You couldn't stand that I gave him a life you never could." I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. The truth was marching toward us from the printer in the lab. For 10 minutes we waited. The silence was heavy, suffocating. The only sound was Lucinda's heavy breathing and the distant beep of Zion's monitor confirming he was still alive, still fighting. Then the lab door opened. Dr. Hayes stepped out. He wasn't running this time. He was walking slowly. In his hand he held 2 pieces of paper. He didn't look at the detectives. He didn't look at Terence. He looked straight at Lucinda. I had seen Dr. Hayes look at trauma victims with compassion. I had seen him look at colleagues with respect. But I had never seen him look at a human being the way he was looking at Lucinda right now. He looked at her like she was a virus, like she was a cancer that needed to be cut out. He walked into the center of the circle. He held up the first paper. The vial contained water mixed with concentrated brodifacoum. Dr. Hayes said, his voice flat and cold. "It is a 99% match to the toxin found in the boy's blood. It is not holy water. It is liquid death." Lucinda didn't speak. She just stared at the floor. "But that is not all," Dr. Hayes continued. "While we were waiting, I took the liberty of running a second test. A test to explain why a grandmother would poison her own blood." He held up the second paper. And that is when the real bomb dropped. The one that would destroy everything. Because Mrs. Hayes, he said, stepping closer to her until he was right in her face. You knew, didn't you? You knew that if he ever got a real blood test, the secret would come out. What secret? Terence asked, stepping forward, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Hayes turned to Terence. He handed him the second paper. Read it, Dr. Hayes said. Terence looked at the paper. His eyes scanned the lines of data. He frowned. He shook his head. I don't understand, he said. What does exclusion mean? It means, Dr. Hayes said, his voice ringing through the silent hallway. That Zion is not your son. Terence dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing right at Lucinda's feet. Lucinda closed her eyes. And for the first time she looked old. She looked defeated. And I stood there watching the world they had built on lies crumble into dust. The hallway of the trauma unit had transformed into a courtroom without a judge. The police detectives stood like statues, their hands resting near their belts, while the hospital security team formed a perimeter that felt suffocating. Lucinda was vibrating with a manic energy. She looked like a cornered animal that had decided its only chance of survival was to attack everything in sight. She spun toward the lead detective, her face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation that she had worn so perfectly for so many years. "Officer, arrest her!" Lucinda screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "Arrest Jasmine right now. She is the one with the medical degree. She is the one who knows how to mix chemicals. She planted that vial in my purse when I was praying. She is trying to frame a grieving grandmother because she is jealous that her son loves me more." I stood there feeling the weight of her accusation. In the past, her voice would have made me crumble. It would have made me question my own sanity. But today, I felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity. I looked at Terence standing behind his mother. He looked lost. He looked at me, then at his mother, then at the floor, unable to choose a side, even when the truth was staring him in the face. That is enough. The voice did not belong to a police officer. It belonged to Dr. Hayes. He stepped into the center of the circle, holding the two pieces of paper he had retrieved from the lab. He did not look at the detectives. He did not look at me. He looked straight at Lucinda with a gaze so intense it seemed to strip away her expensive Chanel suit and leave her naked in her guilt. Dr. Hayes raised the first piece of paper. The hallway went deathly silent. The only sound was the distant rhythmic beeping of the monitors from inside the room where my son lay sleeping. "Mrs. Hayes, you claim this vial contains holy water." Dr. Hayes said, his voice low and dangerous. "You claim you use it to bless your grandson." "It is holy water," Lucinda spat. "It is consecrated." Dr. Hayes shook his head slowly. "I just ran a spectral analysis on the liquid in your purse, and I compared it to the toxicology screen from Zion's blood. They are a 99% match." He took a step closer to her. Lucinda backed up until she hit the wall, and then Dr. Hayes delivered the sentence. He spoke 8 words that hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. "The vial in your purse is rat poison," Lucinda gasped. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and old. "It is warfarin," Dr. Hayes continued, his voice rising with every word. "Concentrated industrial-grade rodenticide. You have not been blessing him, Lucinda. You have been slowly killing him. You have been dosing him every single day for months, maybe years. That is why he bruises. That is why he is weak. That is why a simple car accident almost caused him to bleed to death." "No," Lucinda whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, that is not true. I was helping him, Dr. Hayes roared. "You were inducing a clotting disorder. You were making him dependent on you. It is a textbook case of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. You kept him sick so you could be the only one who could care for him. You kept him weak so he couldn't leave you. You kept him isolated so no one would see the bruises." Terence made a sound like a wounded animal. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with horror. "Mom," he choked out. You told me he was anemic. You told me the blue powder was iron supplements. I fed him that stuff. I gave it to him when you were out of town. Lucinda spun on her son, grabbing his lapels. I did it for us, Terence, she hissed, her voice frantic. I did it to keep him safe. He is fragile. He needs us. If he was healthy, he would want to go play sports. He would want to go to school. He would leave us. I needed him to stay close. I needed him to be ours. She was admitting it. She was twisting the narrative, trying to turn attempted murder into an act of twisted love. She truly believed that poisoning her grandson was a form of protection. The police officer stepped forward, reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. Mrs. Hayes, place your hands behind your back, he said sternly. Lucinda screamed, No, you don't understand. I am the matriarch of this family. I decide what is best for my grandson. I watched as the metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt triumphant. But I looked at Dr. Hayes. He wasn't finished. He was still holding the second piece of paper, and the look on his face told me that the poison was only the beginning. Dr. Hayes waited until the officer had secured Lucinda. Then he turned his attention to Terence. Terence was sobbing openly now, leaning against the wall. I didn't know he cried looking at me. Jasmine. I swear I didn't know she was poisoning him. I thought he was just sick. Dr. Hayes stepped in front of Terence. I believe you didn't know about the poison, Dr. Hayes said coldly. But there is something else you didn't know. Something your mother has been hiding from you for 6 years. Lucinda stopped struggling against the officer. She went completely still. Her eyes locked onto the second piece of paper, and for the first time she looked truly terrified. Doctor, don't! Lucinda begged, her voice cracking. Please don't do this. It will destroy him. Dr. Hayes ignored her. He looked at me, then back at Terence. Mrs. Hayes claims she poisoned the boy to keep him close, Dr. Hayes said. But that is a lie. She poisoned him to keep him from seeing a real doctor. Because if a competent doctor ever ran a full genetic workup on Zion, they would have found this. He thrust the second paper into Terence's chest. Terence grabbed it with trembling hands. He stared at the data, the rows of numbers, the genetic markers. I don't understand, Terence whispered. What is this? It is a paternity test, Dr. Hayes said. I frowned. A paternity test? Why would we need a paternity test? I never cheated on Terence. We did IVF. We spent $50,000 at the clinic to conceive Zion. Terence looked up from the paper. His face was a mask of confusion. It says exclusion, he stammered. It says 0% probability. It means, Dr. Hayes said, his voice ringing with finality, that Zion is not your son. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. It was the silence of a universe collapsing. I stepped forward. That is impossible, I said, my voice shaking. We did IVF. They used your sample, Terence. I was there. I saw them take it. Dr. Hayes turned to me, his expression softening slightly. You saw them take a sample, Jasmine. But that sample never made it to the petri dish. He turned back to Lucinda, who was now weeping silently, tears ruining her perfect makeup. Tell them, Lucinda, Dr. Hayes commanded. Tell them why your son has 0 genetic match to his own child. Lucinda didn't speak. She just hung her head. Fine, I will tell them, Dr. Hayes said. Terence, you had mumps when you were 12. It caused a complication called orchitis. It rendered you completely sterile. You have never been able to have children. Terence looked at his mother. You knew, he whispered. Of course she knew, Dr. Hayes said. She has known for 20 years. But the Hayes Family Trust has a clause, doesn't it? The multi-million-dollar trust fund that controls your real estate empire? It only unlocks for a biological male heir of the direct bloodline. I felt the room spin. It was about money. It was always about money. So when you and Jasmine went for IVF, Dr. Hayes continued relentlessly. Lucinda paid a visit to the clinic. She bribed the fertility doctor. A doctor who conveniently died of a heart attack 2 years ago, taking his secrets to the grave. She had him swap your sterile sample for a donor sample. A random donor. I gasped, clutching my stomach. My son. My beautiful boy. He wasn't Terrence's. He was half me and half a stranger. She used you, Jasmine, Dr. Hayes said, looking at me with pity. She needed a vessel. She needed a woman to carry the baby to make it look legitimate. And once Zion was born, she needed to get rid of you so she could control the heir. But she had a problem. Zion doesn't look like a Hayes. He has the donor's eyes. He has the donor's hair texture. He pointed at the vial of poison in the evidence bag. She was terrified that one day a doctor would notice. She was terrified that a blood test would reveal the truth. So she made him sick. She kept him on a cocktail of drugs to mess up his blood counts, so no one would look too closely at his DNA. She was willing to torture an innocent child for 6 years just to keep her hands on a trust fund. Terrence let out a scream that sounded like it tore his throat apart. He fell to his knees in the middle of the hallway, clutching the paternity test to his chest. "You lied to me," he screamed at his mother. "You lied to me my whole life." Lucinda looked up. Her face was hard again. The mask was back. "I did what I had to do," she hissed. "You were broken, Terrence. You couldn't give me an heir." "I fixed it. I got us the money. I secured the legacy. You should be thanking me." The detective had heard enough. He grabbed Lucinda by the arm and spun her around. "Lucinda Hayes, you are under arrest for attempted murder, aggravated child abuse, fraud, and grand larceny," he said, reciting her rights. As they dragged her away down the long hospital corridor, she didn't look at her son. She didn't look at me. She looked back at the trauma room where Zion lay. "He is mine," she screamed. "I bought him. He is mine." I stood there watching her go. I felt Emily's hand on my shoulder, but I couldn't feel it. I looked at Terrence sobbing on the floor, a man who had lost his mother, his son, and his identity in the span of 10 minutes. But mostly I thought about my son. The boy who had survived poison. The boy who had survived a car crash. The boy who was now free. He didn't have the Hayes bloodline. And thank God for that. He was safe from their legacy. He was just mine. Finally and completely, he was just mine. The piece of paper in Terrence's hand was not just a medical report, it was a death certificate for the life he thought he had. He stared at the 0% probability statistic, and the world around him dissolved into a gray static. For 34 years he had been the Golden Prince of Atlanta. He walked with his head high, believing he was the patriarch of a powerful dynasty. He believed he had a son who looked up to him. He believed he had a mother who worshipped the ground he walked on. He believed he was a man. But in the span of a heartbeat, Dr. Hayes had stripped it all away. He was not a father. He was a sterile vessel. He was not a patriarch. He was a puppet. And the woman he called mother, the woman who claimed to do everything for his benefit, was actually his puppet master. She had known. She had known since he was 12 years old that he was broken inside. And instead of comforting him, instead of helping him accept his reality, she had built a castle of lies on top of his pain. Terrence looked up from the paper. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked at me standing there, with the blood of a stranger coursing through the veins of the boy I loved. He realized in that moment that I was the only thing real in his entire life. I was the only one who had loved Zion for who he was, not for what he represented. And he had thrown me away because his mother told him to. A sound started deep in his chest. It wasn't a cry. It was a low, animalistic growl of pure agony. "You knew," he whispered. The hallway fell silent. Even the police officers seemed to sense that the air was charged with something more dangerous than a weapon. "You knew I couldn't have children," Terrence said, his voice rising with every syllable. "You knew I was sterile. And you let me believe I was a father. You let me hold him in the delivery room. You let me cut the cord. You let me name him." Lucinda stood there with her hands cuffed behind her back. She didn't look remorseful. She looked annoyed. She looked like a parent dealing with a toddler who was making a scene in public. "I gave you what you wanted, Terrence," she snapped. "You wanted a legacy. You wanted to be a man. I bought you a son. I paid good money to ensure that embryo took. You should be grateful." "Grateful!" Terrence screamed. The sound tore through the sterile hospital air, making the nurses jump. "You made me live a lie," he shouted, stepping toward her. "You made me torture my wife. You made me kick Jasmine out of her own house. You made me believe she was crazy." But she wasn't crazy. She was the only honest person in this family. Lucinda rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being dramatic. I did it for the trust fund. If we didn't have an heir, the board would have dissolved the assets. We would be living in a condo, Terrence." "A condo? I saved our lifestyle." That was the breaking point. Something inside Terrence snapped. It was audible, like a dry branch breaking in a storm. The years of conditioning, the years of obedience, the years of being a mama's boy evaporated in an instant. All that was left was a man who realized his entire existence was a fraud. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He lunged. Terrence moved with a speed I didn't know he possessed. He flew across the few feet of space separating them. The police officer standing next to Lucinda was taken by surprise. He reached out to grab Terrence, but he was too slow. Terrence's hands found his mother's throat. "You witch!" he screamed, slamming her back against the hard hospital wall. "You stole my life! You stole my son!" Lucinda gagged, her eyes bulging. She couldn't fight back because her hands were cuffed. She could only stare into the face of the monster she had created. Her expensive heels scrabbled against the linoleum floor. Terrence squeezed harder, his knuckles white. He wasn't seeing his mother anymore. He was seeing the architect of his misery. He was seeing the woman who poisoned a child and poisoned his soul. "Get off her!" the detective shouted, diving into the fray. The two officers grabbed Terrence by the shoulders, trying to pull him off. But he was fueled by a hysterical strength. He held on, dragging Lucinda down toward the floor with him. "I hate you!" Terrence sobbed even as he choked her. "I hate you! I wish you were dead!" "Sir, let go or we will tase you," the officer warned, reaching for the yellow weapon on his belt. Terrence didn't hear him. He was lost in the red mist of betrayal. "Taser! Taser! Taser!" the officer shouted. There was a loud popping sound followed by the distinct crackle of electricity. Terrence's body went rigid. His back arched violently and his hands flew open, releasing Lucinda's throat. He convulsed for a second and then dropped to the floor like a stone, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. Lucinda slid down the wall, gasping for air. There were bright red finger marks rapidly bruising on her neck. She coughed, hacking loudly, trying to suck oxygen back into her lungs. The hallway was absolute chaos. Nurses were screaming. Patients were peering out of their rooms. The security guards were rushing to assist the officers who were now cuffing Terrence as he lay groaning on the floor. But Lucinda wasn't finished. Even as she sat there, disheveled, humiliated, and bruised, she couldn't stop. The narcissism ran too deep. She looked at her son lying on the floor, the son she had just driven to madness, and she spat at him. "You weak fool!" she rasped, her voice hoarse from the strangulation. "I did everything for you. I built this dynasty for you. And this is how you repay me." She looked up at the officers who were hauling her to her feet. She looked at Dr. Hayes, who was watching with cold judgment. And she looked at me. "I created an heir!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the ceiling tiles. "I created a legacy. It doesn't matter whose sperm it was. It matters that his name is Hayes. I did what had to be done. I am the only one with the strength to do what is necessary." The detective shoved her forward, forcing her to walk. "Shut your mouth, Mrs. Hayes," he said roughly. "You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it." They dragged her away, still screaming about her sacrifice, still claiming she was the victim. They dragged Terrence away behind her. His expensive suit ruined, his face streaked with tears and snot, his spirit completely broken. The Hayes dynasty had fallen. It didn't fall with a whimper. It fell with a scream and the crackle of a taser. I stood in the silence that followed, shaking from the adrenaline. I looked around the empty hallway. The floor was scuffed. The air still smelled of ozone and violence. And then I saw her. In the far corner of the waiting area, standing in the shadows, was Emily. My sister-in-law was holding her phone up. Her hand was steady. She wasn't calling a lawyer. She wasn't calling an ambulance. She was recording. I saw the interface on her screen. It was Facebook Live. And in the corner, the little red eye icon showed the viewer count. 5,000 people were watching. Emily had broadcast the whole thing. She had broadcast the poison revelation. She had broadcast the paternity test. She had broadcast the assault. She had broadcast Lucinda's confession. The comments were scrolling up the screen faster than I could read them. Monster. Lock her up. Poor kid. That family is evil. Emily looked at me. Her eyes were sad, but there was a grim satisfaction in her set jaw. She lowered the phone slowly, ending the broadcast. "It is done," Emily whispered across the room. "The world knows. They can't buy their way out of this one, Jasmine. It is over." I looked at the phone in her hand, the tool that had just delivered the final blow. Lucinda loved her reputation more than she loved her family. She loved her social standing more than she loved God. And in 5 minutes, Emily had burned it all to the ground. The Hayes name, which had opened doors in Atlanta for 50 years, was now mud. It was synonymous with poison and lies. I took a deep breath. The air felt cleaner somehow. The oppressive weight that had been sitting on my chest for 4 years was gone. I turned back to the trauma room. I walked through the doors, leaving the wreckage of my ex-husband's family behind me. I went back to the only thing that mattered. I went back to the little boy with the golden blood who was finally safe. The wheels of justice usually grind slowly, but when you have a viral video with 5 million views and a toxicology report that reads like a horror novel, the system moves with terrifying speed. It had been exactly 7 days since the nightmare in the hospital hallway. 7 days since I watched the police drag my ex-husband and his mother away in handcuffs. 7 days since I held my son without fear for the first time in 4 years. I walked into the Fulton County Superior Court, not as the scared, trembling woman who had lost everything in this same building years ago. Today, I walked in as the plaintiff. I wore a sharp navy blue suit that Emily had picked out for me. My hair was pulled back. My head was high. Flanking me were 3 of the most vicious family law attorneys in Atlanta, a team that Emily had paid for using her own divorce settlement money. They looked like sharks circling in shallow water, and for the first time the sharks were on my side. The courtroom was packed. The press had descended on the case like vultures drawn to the smell of old money rotting in the sun. But I didn't care about the cameras. I only cared about the woman sitting in the defendant's box. Lucinda Hayes was unrecognizable. The Chanel suits were gone, replaced by a stark orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion. Her hair, usually coiffed to perfection, hung limp and gray around her face. She sat behind a thick glass partition designed for high-risk defendants. When our eyes met, she didn't sneer. She didn't look away. She glared at me with a hatred so pure it felt like a physical weight pressing against the glass. Terrence sat at a separate table, his head bowed. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in a week. He wore a suit, but it hung loosely on his frame as if he had stopped eating. He didn't look at me. He stared at his hands, which were clasped tightly in front of him on the defense table. The judge entered the room, a stern woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human cruelty. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She opened the file in front of her, and the sound of paper turning was the only noise in the room. "We are here to determine the permanent custody arrangement for Zion Hayes," the judge stated, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "We are also here to address the emergency motion to terminate parental rights based on the evidence provided by the district attorney." My lawyer stood up. He didn't need to shout. He simply laid out the facts with surgical precision. "Your Honor," he began, "we are not just asking for custody. We are asking for protection from a monster." He signaled to the bailiff, who dimmed the lights. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. It was the video Emily had recorded. The quality was crystal clear. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Lucinda's voice shrieked through the speakers, admitting that she had created an heir for the money, admitting that she owned him. I watched Lucinda in the glass box. She didn't look ashamed. She sat straighter as if she still believed her own twisted logic. The video ended. The lights came back up. But we have more than a confession, my lawyer continued. We have the physical weapon. He held up a photo of the unlabeled vial found in Lucinda's purse. And we have the motive. He placed a stack of documents on the judge's bench. These were recovered from a hidden safe in Mrs. Hayes's bedroom during the police raid 3 days ago. They are the original medical records from the fertility clinic. They prove that Mrs. Hayes paid $50,000 to swap her son's sterile genetic material with the donors. They prove she knowingly committed paternity fraud to access the Hayes family trust, and they prove that she began poisoning the child with blood thinners the moment he turned 2 years old because she was terrified that a routine blood test would reveal he wasn't a Hayes. The judge picked up the documents. She read them slowly. Her expression went from professional detachment to visible disgust. She looked over her glasses at Lucinda. Mrs. Hayes, the judge said, her voice dripping with ice. Is this true? Did you poison a child to protect a bank account? Lucinda stood up. Her lawyer tried to pull her down, but she shook him off. I protected the legacy. She announced, her voice raspy but defiant. I did what was necessary. That boy lived a life of luxury because of me. He had the best clothes, the best house. He was a Hayes because I said he was a Hayes. Sit down, the judge barked, slamming her gavel. Lucinda remained standing, gripping the edge of the table. You don't understand, she shouted. I made him. He is my property. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Even now, facing life in prison, she viewed my son as an object, a possession. The judge looked at Lucinda with cold finality. Lucinda Hayes, this court finds you to be a danger to society and a depraved individual. You are hereby stripped of all legal rights regarding the minor child Zion. You are to have no contact, direct or indirect, for the remainder of your life. The judge turned to the bailiff. The defendant is remanded to custody to await trial on charges of attempted first-degree murder, grand larceny, medical fraud, and aggravated child abuse. The district attorney has indicated they will be seeking the maximum sentence, which in this state is life without the possibility of parole. Get her out of my sight. 2 officers moved in. They grabbed Lucinda by the arms. She didn't scream this time. She just looked at me one last time, her eyes dead and empty, before they dragged her through the side door. The orange jumpsuit disappeared into the shadows, and the air in the room instantly felt lighter. Then the judge turned her attention to Terence. Mr. Hayes, she said, softening her tone slightly, but only slightly. The evidence shows you were unaware of the poisoning. However, your negligence is staggering. You allowed your mother to isolate this child. You failed to protect him. And legally speaking, the paternity test confirms you have no biological claim to the boy. Terence stood up. He looked shaky on his feet. Your Honor, my lawyer interjected, we are asking for a full termination of Mr. Hayes's rights as well. He may not have held the poison, but he held the door open for the abuser. The judge nodded. I am inclined to agree, she said. Zion needs stability. He needs to heal. I am granting sole legal and physical custody to the mother Jasmine. Mr. Hayes, your parental rights are hereby terminated effective immediately. You are not to approach the child or the mother. It was over. The gavel was raised, ready to seal the verdict. Wait. The voice was cracked and broken. Terence stepped out from behind the defense table. He ignored his lawyer's frantic whispers to sit down. He walked into the center of the aisle. Your Honor, please, Terence begged. Just 1 minute. I know I lost him. I know I lost everything. But please let me speak to her. The judge paused, her gavel hovering in the air. She looked at me. It was my choice. I could have said no. I could have had him removed. But I looked at him. Really looked at him. The arrogance was gone. The mama's boy was dead. All that was left was a pile of wreckage in a suit. I nodded to the judge. The judge lowered her hand. "Make it quick, Mr. Hayes." Terrence turned to face me. He didn't walk closer. He stayed 15 feet away, respecting the invisible barrier between my new life and his destroyed one. He looked me in the eyes, and tears began to stream down his face uncheckered. "I am sorry," he whispered. Then he did something that the Terrence I knew would never have done. He didn't check his watch. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He sank to his knees. Right there on the dirty courtroom floor in front of the press, in front of the judge, in front of the woman he had cast aside, he collapsed onto his knees and bowed his head. "I should have listened to you," he sobbed, his voice echoing in the silent room. "You told me she was evil years ago, and I didn't listen. I let her take him. I let her hurt him. I am not his father, Jasmine. I know that now. I don't deserve to be his father." He looked up, his face twisted in agony. "But you are the best mother I have ever seen. Thank you for saving him. Thank you for saving him from us." He stayed there, kneeling, a broken statue of a man waiting for absolution that I wasn't sure I could give. The courtroom held its breath. The flash of cameras went off, capturing the final fall of the Hayes prince. I stood up slowly, smoothing my skirt. I looked down at him. I didn't feel hate anymore. I didn't feel love either. I just felt a profound sense of closure. "Goodbye, Terrence," I said softly. I turned my back on him and walked toward the judge, ready to sign the papers that would give me my son back forever. But as I reached for the pen, a commotion at the back of the courtroom made everyone turn around. Terrence was still kneeling, but his face had gone slack. He was staring at the doorway, staring at someone who had just entered. I followed his gaze. Standing in the back of the room, framed by the exit sign, was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, with skin the color of deep mahogany. But it wasn't his height that stopped my heart. It was his eyes. They were a mix of brown and emerald green. Zion's eyes. The donor. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut behind me, muffling the sounds of the gallery and the press, who were still frantically trying to upload their stories. The corridor of the Fulton County Superior Court was long and wide, lined with marble benches that had seen centuries of grief and victory. For the first time in 4 years, I walked down that hallway without the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. My heels clicked against the floor with a rhythm that sounded like freedom. "Jasmine, wait." The voice was broken, cracked by sobbing and desperation. I did not stop walking. I did not owe him my time. I did not owe him my attention. But I knew this moment was necessary. It was the final surgical incision to remove the cancer of the Hayes family from my life completely. "Jasmine, please just stop." I turned around slowly. Terrence was jogging toward me, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He looked nothing like the arrogant man who had stood in the same hallway 4 years ago and told me I would never see my son again. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie was askew, and his eyes were red and swollen. He looked like a child who had lost his mother in a grocery store, terrified and alone. He stopped 10 feet away from me, respecting the invisible barrier I had erected. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving with emotion. "I needed to tell you," he stammered. "I needed to say it without the lawyers and the judge. I am sorry." I stood there holding my briefcase, which contained the custody order the judge had just signed. I looked at him with a detachment that surprised even me. I expected to feel anger. I expected to feel hate. But looking at him now, I felt nothing. He was just a stranger with a familiar face. "You are sorry," I repeated, my voice flat. "You are sorry that you got caught, Terrence. You are sorry that your inheritance is gone. You are sorry that your reputation is in tatters." "No," he said, shaking his head violently, tears flying from his face. "No, Jasmine. I am sorry about Zion. I am sorry I failed him." He took a step closer, his hands reaching out as if to beg. "I still love him, Jasmine," he cried. "You have to believe me. I raised him for 4 years. I taught him how to tie his shoes. I read him bedtime stories. He is my son in every way that matters. Please don't cut me out completely. Let me say goodbye to him. Let me explain." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that echoed off the marble walls. "You love him?" I asked. "Is that what you call it? You watched him waste away for 4 years, Terence. You watched him get weaker and paler every single day. You watched bruises bloom on his skin like flowers of agony, and you did nothing." "I didn't know," he sobbed. "My mother told me it was anemia. She told me the doctors were handling it. You didn't know because you didn't want to know." I cut him off, my voice rising. "You were happy to play the role of the doting father for the cameras, but when it came to protecting him, you were a coward. You let your mother isolate him. You let her feed him poison. You watched me get dragged out of his life screaming, and you didn't lift a finger because you were too afraid of losing your allowance." I stepped closer to him until I was looking up into his tear-filled eyes. "And now you want to claim him because of love, no, Terence. You want to claim him because he is the only thing you have left. You lost your wife, you lost your mother, you lost your money, and now you are terrified of being alone." Terence fell to his knees right there in the hallway. He grabbed the hem of my jacket, burying his face in the fabric. "Please, Jasmine," he begged, his voice muffled. "He is all I have. He is the only good thing I ever did. Even if I am not his biological father, I am his dad. Doesn't that count for anything?" I looked down at the top of his head. I felt a flicker of pity, but I crushed it instantly. Pity was dangerous. Pity was what had kept me in that abusive marriage for so long. I reached into my briefcase. My fingers brushed against the crisp paper of the document my lawyer had prepared just in case. "Stand up, Terence," I said firmly, pulling my jacket from his grasp. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. He stood, wiping his knees. I pulled out the document. It was a single page, simple and devastating. "This is a renunciation of paternity form," I said, holding it out to him. He stared at it, as if it were a poisonous snake. "What is this?" he whispered. "It is your exit strategy," I said. "It is a legal document stating that you acknowledge you are not the biological father of Zion Hayes. It states that you voluntarily relinquish all parental rights and responsibilities. It states that you will never seek contact with him again." Terence backed away, shaking his head. "I can't sign that," he said. "I can't just erase him from my life. He is my son. He is not your son," I said, my voice hard as steel. "Biology says he isn't your son. Morality says he isn't your son. You failed the biological test, and you failed the moral test. You are not a father, Terence. You are just a man who lived in the same house as a child he allowed to be tortured." I took a step forward, holding the pen out to him. "And here is why you are going to sign it." I lowered my voice so only he could hear. "Right now, the district attorney is building a case against your mother for fraud against the Hayes Family Trust. They know she falsified medical records to unlock the funds. They know she committed paternity fraud." Terence nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. That is on her." "Is it?" I asked. "You are the beneficiary of that trust, Terence. You spent that money. You lived in the house bought with that money. You drove the cars bought with that money. If you fight me on custody, if you try to drag this out and claim you are the legal father, the district attorney is going to start wondering how much you knew. They are going to wonder if you were complicit in the fraud. They are going to wonder if you knew about your own sterility and helped your mother pull off the scam." Terence went pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "If you sign this," I continued, "I will walk away. I will tell the DA that as far as I know, you were just a pawn. You were a victim of your mother's lies, just like Zion. You walk away with no child, but you also walk away with no prison time for fraud." I pressed the document into his chest. "But if you don't sign it, I will make it my personal mission to prove that you knew everything. I will testify that you were part of the scheme. I will make sure you share a cell right next to your mother. Terence looked at the paper. He looked at the pen. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped them. He looked at me one last time, searching for any trace of the woman who used to love him. But she was gone. She had died the day he let them take her son away. I have no choice, do I? He whispered. You made your choice 4 years ago, I said. This is just the consequence. He walked over to the marble bench. He laid the paper down. He uncapped the pen. I watched him. He hesitated for a long moment, the tip of the pen hovering over the signature line. A tear fell from his cheek, landing on the paper, creating a small, wet spot near the bottom. Then he signed. It was a messy scrawl, a signature of defeat. He capped the pen and handed the paper back to me. He looked smaller somehow. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. Take care of him, Terence choked out. Tell him I loved him. I took the paper and slid it into my briefcase. The sound of the lock clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I won't tell him anything about you, I said truthfully. I will let him forget. That is the greatest kindness I can give him. I turned around and walked away. I didn't look back. I knew he was still standing there alone in the hallway. He had lost his wife. He had lost his son. He had lost his mother to prison. He had lost his honor. And he had lost the illusion of the life he thought he owned. I walked toward the exit where the sunlight was streaming in. My steps were light. My heart was full. I was walking toward a future where the name Hayes would never be spoken again. I was walking toward my son, and this time no one was ever going to take him away from me. The salt air of the Florida coast smells nothing like the antiseptic corridors of Northside Hospital. It smells of freedom. It smells of life. I sat on the weathered wooden deck of our small rented beach house, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. It has been 6 months since the trial. 180 days of waking up without fear. 180 days of not checking my phone for threatening messages from lawyers. Down on the sugar-white sand, a little boy was running. He was sprinting, chasing a seagull with the boundless energy of a golden retriever. He tripped over a piece of driftwood and went sprawling onto his stomach. 6 months ago, that fall would have terrified me. 6 months ago, that impact would have caused a massive internal hemorrhage. It would have meant a frantic drive to the emergency room. It would have meant watching purple bruises bloom across his skin, like ink in water. But today Zion just rolled over. He sat up in the sand and laughed. He brushed the grit off his knees, which were scraped but clotting perfectly. His skin was a rich, glowing brown, warm and healthy. His eyes, the green and brown kaleidoscope eyes that belonged to a stranger, were bright with joy. He wasn't the fragile heir to a dying dynasty anymore. He was just a 6-year-old boy who loved the ocean. The sliding glass door behind me opened. I didn't jump. I didn't flinch. I just smiled. Emily walked out carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. She looked different too. The nervous, terrified woman who used to whisper in corners was gone. She had cut her hair into a sharp bob, and she was wearing a bright yellow sundress. It was the kind of color Lucinda would have called garish. Emily wore it like a flag of independence. She sat down next to me, handing me a glass. We watched Zion run into the surf, kicking up water. He looks good, Emily said softly. He is good, I replied, taking a sip of the tea. Dr. Hayes says his blood counts are completely normal. The poison is out of his system. His bone marrow has recovered. He is going to be tall, Emily. He is going to be strong. Emily nodded. She reached into her tote bag. The mood shifted slightly. The air grew a little heavier but not oppressive. I brought you something, she said. I wasn't sure if you wanted to see it, but I thought you should know. She pulled out a copy of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She folded it so the bottom half of the front page was visible. I looked at the headline, "Disgraced Socialite Found Dead in State Prison." I stared at the photo. It was an old picture of Lucinda from a charity gala taken years ago. She looked regal, untouchable, and arrogant. "What happened?" I asked. My voice remained steady. My heart rate didn't even spike. Emily sighed, looking out at the ocean. "It happened yesterday morning. Apparently she tried to organize the other inmates. She tried to boss them around like she bossed us around. She told the wrong person what to do in the cafeteria. It was quick, Jasmine. She didn't suffer long." I looked at the photo of the woman who had tried to erase me, the woman who had poisoned my son, the woman who had destroyed her own family for a legacy that didn't exist. I waited for the satisfaction to hit me. I waited for the surge of vindictive joy. But it didn't come. Instead, I just felt a profound sense of release. It was like watching a storm cloud finally dissipate over the ocean. She was gone. The monster under the bed was dead. She could never hurt us again. "And the rest of them?" I asked. Bankrupt, Emily said with a grim smile. "The lawsuits from the investors in the trust fund took everything. The mansion is being sold to pay off the debts. The cars are gone. The jewelry is gone. The Hayes name is mud in Atlanta. Terrence is living in a studio apartment in Decatur working at a car rental agency. He calls me sometimes asking about Zion. I don't answer." I reached out and squeezed Emily's hand. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for being the one brave person in that house. Thank you for the video." "We saved each other," Emily said, squeezing back. Zion ran up to the deck breathless and dripping wet. He held up a white seashell perfectly spiraled. "Mommy, look," he shouted. "It has no cracks. It is perfect." "It is beautiful, baby," I said, brushing the wet hair off his forehead. "Go find me another one." He turned and sprinted back toward the waves. I watched him go. I watched the way his muscles moved fluidly under his skin. I watched the strength in his legs. I looked down at my own arm. In the crook of my elbow there was a small white scar. It was barely visible now, fading with time. It was the place where the needle had gone in. It was the place where I had given him the golden blood. For years Lucinda had preached about bloodlines. She had obsessed over purity and heritage and the blue blood of the aristocracy. She thought that blood made you royalty. She thought that blood gave you the right to rule over others. She was wrong. Blood isn't about power. It isn't about money or last names or trust funds. Blood is life. My rare blood, the blood she called dirty, the blood she called poison, ran through my son's veins right now. It was carrying oxygen to his brain. It was healing his scrapes. It was fueling his laughter. I stood up, walking to the railing of the deck. The sun was gone now, leaving a soft twilight that felt like a blanket of peace. I took a deep breath of the salty air, filling my lungs with the future. They thought noble blood made a person, but it was the blood of a mother's love that saved everything. I am Jasmine. I am a survivor. I am a mother. And this is my new life. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to fight for the people you love, please like and share this video. And remember, family isn't always who you are related to. Sometimes it is the people who help you bleed the poison out.